Welcome to another episode of the brand called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I am delighted to welcome a very senior, accomplished, and respected professional from Omaha, Nebraska, USA, Dr. Darrin Peppard. Darrin, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you. Dr. Peppard is the president and founder of Road to Awesome LLC. He's an author, and all of you know I'm very partial to authors. He's an author of a book titled Road to Awesome, and he's also the host of a podcast titled Leaning into Leadership, where he shares actionable insights on leadership, team development, and creating thriving, purpose driven cultures. So, Darrin, we'll speak today about leadership, team development, and culture. But before we start, tell me a little bit about your own journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, thank you for having me on the podcast. I appreciate it. So I'm a hometown kid from a little small state here in the United States,
Mhm.
Wyoming, the smallest state
Yeah.
in the entire country, and um, wanted to go and make a difference for kids. Got the opportunity when I was in college to coach an elementary school basketball team, and of all the things that would set you on a path, that's what set me on my path. Eventually, after graduating from the University of Wyoming, I became a middle school teacher, was a high school teacher, actually became a head basketball coach, and wanted to continue to develop and do more in terms of leadership. I had a wonderful principal that hired me for my first teaching job. And she was that person for me that kind of brought the tap on my shoulder, if you will, and said, hey, you should think about leadership.
Mm.
That eventually led me to being a high school assistant principal, high school principal, and ultimately a school superintendent here in the United States. I spent 26 total years in public education,
Mm.
and again, later in that journey, there was a desire to make more of an impact
Mhm.
than I could just in my school district. And um, because I was somebody who had had a leadership coach when I was a principal, I wanted to start coaching and supporting other leaders, and had that opportunity, started working with several leaders in a lot of different school districts around the country. And about 3 years ago, made the decision to just jump out of the day-to-day public education space and into the leadership coaching and speaking. As you mentioned, I'm an author. My first book, Road to Awesome, is really about the six things I felt were really important in school leadership, and we'll get into that in a little
Mm.
bit.
Mm.
But yeah, now I live in Omaha, Nebraska, and work with schools and districts all over North America, helping
Fantastic.
them really find that clarity to work in their purpose and to really
Amazing.
enjoy the
Amazing.
opportunity in leadership.
Thank you for sharing your own journey, and what an amazing journey. So let's talk a little bit about leadership now, Darren. And you said very early in your career you got interested in leadership when one of your colleagues told you that's the path you should pursue. My first question is, what does effective leadership mean to you? And how has your perspective on leadership evolved over the years?
Yeah, I would tell you that to me, effective leadership is understanding that really effective leaders are able to lead from the front,
Mhm.
from the middle, and from the back of the
Yeah.
organization. And by that, I mean leading from the front, being able to really create that crystal clear, compelling vision of here's where we're going.
Mm.
Leading from the middle, meaning I work amongst everybody who's a part of the organization,
Yeah.
helping them see
Mm.
what it is that we're trying to accomplish and how each of them has an important role in that.
Mm.
And then leading from the back, meaning allowing others to take on leadership roles and to really excel in the positions and opportunities that they've been given within the organization. And it only happens if leaders are really, really clear. I think great leadership comes down to two things. Number one, being crystal clear about what it is that you're trying to accomplish, about what your vision is, about what you expect of others and of yourself, and what you're looking for on a day-to-day basis. And then the second piece would be being
Mm.
very intentional with your communication, with how you allocate your time, with the steps and actions that you take. And when leaders can reach that level where they can lead from all three positions and really gain that clarity and intentionality, man, that is effective leadership right there. But it takes time. It really does.
What a great response. Thank you. And one of the dilemmas a lot of leaders I have spoken to face, and I've remember facing this myself, is how does one align one's personal values with a leadership style?
That's a great question. I really, really appreciate this question because I think it comes down to first and foremost knowing yourself. And if we don't take the time to reflect and really set time aside to think about who we are, both as individuals and as leaders, it's really difficult for us to connect the leadership work and our personal values. I think oftentimes in leadership we get caught up in the day to day. We get caught up in the work, and we tend to forget that reflection piece is so critical. For me, especially when I first became a high school principal, I had this belief that I had to be everything to everybody in the organization. You
Mm.
know, like every day I would show up to work and I would throw on the superhero cape and I was
Mhm.
going to solve everybody's problems and do everything for everyone. And
Yeah.
in reality, that's when that disconnect for me started to happen. And ultimately, making the decision to focus on being a leader and not just run around putting out fires, I think that allowed me to realize, hey, I've got to take a look at what is important to me and when am I reflecting? And ultimately, this is how I did that. And I think this is an important piece for leaders to stay connected to their personal values and their leadership style. Have a place where you are really intentional about reflecting. I
Mm.
was a basketball coach, and as a basketball coach, I watched a lot of videotape, and it shot from up in the balcony, right? So I could see down on the court.
Mm.
And ultimately, I loved being able to watch that video because I could see what was happening, in the game. But I needed that as a leader.
Right.
And ultimately, for me, I needed to have that balcony level view of my
Mm.
leadership. And so I actually would go and stand in the gymnasium where I was a principal on the balcony. And in my mind's eye, I would focus on those core values that I held,
Mm.
like position them on the floor, almost like I could see them there, and just check in with myself about once every 2 weeks. How am I doing with
Mm.
developing and maintaining positive culture in our organization? How am I doing with
Yeah.
ensuring that everyone feels seen and heard and valued and trusted and so forth? And if leaders find that space that or just are intentional about putting that time aside to really reflect and stay connected with their personal values, I think that is how you ultimately get yourself connected to what your true leadership style is going to be.
Well said. Well said. And Darren, what role does empathy play in modern leadership? And how can leaders develop and strengthen the skill?
Yeah, empathy is extremely important,
Mm.
and I think one of the most overlooked skills in leadership, and I think it connects very, very well to being an empathetic leader,
Mhm.
is being a great listener.
Mm.
I think so often, and I mentioned in my last response, as leaders, sometimes we feel like we have to be the superhero of
Correct.
the organization. And when we do that, we tend not to listen
Mm.
as much as we act. And
Mm.
so, something I tell leaders all the time
Mm.
is really think deeply about being that active listener and not simply just listening to respond, but listening to genuinely hear and to genuinely understand what it is that people around us are going through or what they're feeling or what their thoughts are. When leaders are intentional about really listening, what tends to happen is more and more and more the people in the organization start to take a little more ownership of what it is that's happening around them. When
Right.
we feel like we feel like we're heard in our organization, we are much more likely to be more deeply connected, to be more deeply invested in the work that's happening. So for me, empathy only happens when leaders are really good at listening
Mm.
and really hearing what it is that everybody in the organization is trying to accomplish and what they're going through.
Yeah.
We live in a world right now where people are so much more mobile in terms of their work
Yeah.
and moving from one thing to the next. And if we want to keep people in our organization, I think being empathetic and really listening deeply to them, building the relationships with our people, that's how we keep people around.
Very well said. And you're so right. I mean, listening is a very important quality that every leader must have. That's a very, very powerful uh, view and perspective you've given to a lot of my viewers and listeners. One more question relating to leadership, and then I want to move to culture. How can a leader cultivate resilience in themselves and their teams, especially during challenging times? And we've only 2 years ago come out of uh, COVID, which was a challenging time for the whole world.
Yeah, developing resilience, I think it's one of those really interesting skills because it's almost like you don't gain resilience without going through difficult and challenging times.
Yeah.
You don't know how resilient you can be until you're really faced with a challenge. But to me, one of the most important pieces around really cultivating that resilience is knowing that we are in something together. When we isolate ourselves as the leader, or for that matter, just as any individual in an organization, when we don't allow ourselves to be engaged and to be a part of it,
Mhm.
then we tend to find that we've just kind of put ourselves on an island and we're not able to have the support and the camaraderie that we need. Um, I really feel like when we work together and when we foster a culture, and I know we're heading into culture now, where everybody has an opportunity to be seen and to be heard and to be valued and to be trusted, that's where we are able to actually stand shoulder to shoulder and work through different challenging situations. I don't think there's a drill or a practice for building resilience. I think it's simply about building a culture where people feel like, hey, we're all in this together. And that's, to me, that's where resilience really comes from.
Thank you. Let's now talk about culture, Darren. And the very basic definition of culture, as I understand, is oh, that's how it is done here. But you use the terms purpose-driven cultures. How do you define purpose-driven cultures, and why is it essential today?
Well, I think first and foremost, to me, purpose-driven culture means that everybody in the organization knows and understands what it is we're trying to accomplish and where it is that we're going.
Right.
Um, Early in my career, I was part of a school where our culture was honestly pretty toxic. We were not focused on really where we were trying to go. I think we were just trying to maintain and get through the day to day. And I think this happens at a lot of organizations. Um, Obviously, in education is where I was. And the toxicity for us was what we were looking for.
Mm,
We were tending to look for the things that people were doing wrong,
mm,
not the things that people were doing right in our organization. And when we dial in on that, when we spend our time focused on all the things people are doing wrong, we miss out on so many good things that are happening in the organization. So for us, we had to get to what really is our purpose. What are we trying to accomplish in this school? And we were in a staff meeting, and we jokingly said we were trying to solve the two most important things in education. We were, trying to figure out what to do about hats and cell phones
mm,
in our school. A
mm,
silly meeting to be in, but nonetheless one that happens in schools all around the world right now. And one of our staff members asked me a question in the middle of the staff meeting, and to me, it was one of those moments you mentioned, the company and the book Road to Awesome, that comes from this moment in time where really for me two roads diverged. I was on this path where we were all about catching people doing things wrong, and somebody asked these two questions in a staff meeting. She said, "Darrin, why does it always have to be about what they do wrong? Why can't it be about what they do right?"
correct.
And in that moment, it was really like a fork in the road. Do I stay on this path, or maybe now do I start to look and go in a little bit different direction? And obviously for me, I chose to take that other road, the road I call the road to awesome. And by doing so, I changed how I showed up every single day. Instead of showing up looking for things people were doing wrong, I started showing up looking for the things they were doing right. I started showing up as the person who was going to work toward our purpose. I was going to be the person and ultimately that people would follow to that purpose. Because when we know our purpose, when we are clear about where we're trying to go, it becomes a whole lot easier for us to build a culture where people feel like, hey, I want to be part of this. I mean, ultimately, people want to feel like they're part of something special.
Mm,
And when we find that purpose and we lead towards that purpose, I think that's when you start to see the culture really move in the direction that you want it to.
well said. Well said. And what, in your view, is the role of storytelling when it comes to creating and sustaining a purpose-driven culture?
Well, I believe very strongly that if we don't tell our story, somebody else will.
Yeah.
And we probably won't like their version.
Mm,
So, as the leader of the organization, it is absolutely critical that we are telling that story.
mm,
No, no, nobody knows what's happening inside of our walls except
mm.
for us.
Yeah.
And in the absence of information, people will make up their own versions. So, as the leader, when great things are happening, you need to be sharing that. When you are doing things that move you closer and closer to your purpose, you need to be sharing that.
Mm,
That could be sharing through social media, that can be sharing through individual members of your organization. One of our authors here at Road to Awesome is a high school principal, and I love that he does this around the holidays.
mhm,
He'll tell his staff in a staff meeting, you're going to run into the grumpy uncle, or somebody at the store who wants to talk bad about education.
yeah.
So think about who's the one kid this year that you've made an impact on, that you just have to tell that story, and make sure you are ready to tell that story.
Mm,
When we own the story, when we're sharing the information of what's happening in our organization,
mm,
ultimately that's helping us create our
mm.
brand that is our school, our brand that is our organization.
Yeah.
And then when something negative comes along, because we all know something negative will come
Mm,
along,
mm,
the more we have shared those positive stories, the more we have built that trust, and we have built that understanding of our brand.
mm.
And that allows us to kind of move through those challenging times. So if we're not telling the story, we're missing out on a huge
Correct.
piece of leadership, I think.
Correct. Absolutely. So I have time for two more questions for you. My next question is, how can leaders integrate purpose into everyday decision making and their operations?
Well, I think it gets back to something that you talked about at the beginning, which is knowing what your core values are.
Correct.
I think when we know what our core values are, then that allows us to align our purpose with every decision that we make. I think as leaders, it's important that we keep those in front of us.
Hmm.
I always had, a big whiteboard in my office and always had, right on there, what were the things that were super important to me. To me, there are six things that I felt were really important as a
Yeah.
school leader, and I kept those posted at all times. So that then when it came time for decision making, whether it was a small decision or a larger decision that was going to shape the organization,
Mm.
for the coming year or so, I would go back to, okay, how does this align with building that positive culture?
Yeah.
Is this a decision that's going to align with what we say we're
Mm.
trying to do? Is this a decision that's going to align with my belief that everybody should be leading with a coaching mindset?
Mm.
Those types of things. If we're not keeping those core values in front of us and using them to make our decisions, then we're really not we're not leading at that point in time. We're just
Correct.
managing.
Correct.
There's a big difference between the two, right?
Yeah.
And leading from those true values and from ultimately what is that compelling vision? Where are
Mm.
we trying to go? If we're not aligning those two things,
Mm.
then we're absolutely not
So tell me a
embedding
little
our
bit about
purpose.
these 6 points that you have in your book.
Sure. Yeah, so for me, and what I say in the book, and I tell leaders this all the time, I felt that there were six things that were truly important in school leadership, and
Yeah.
I don't want others to say, yes, I agree with you. Rather, I want them to identify their own. For
Correct.
me, it was number one, am I building and maintaining positive culture and climate in my organization?
Mm.
Number two, am I ensuring that all of my staff
Mm.
feel seen and heard and
Mm.
valued and trusted?
Mm.
Number three, again, I was in education. I
Mm.
wanted to empower and embrace student voice. I
Mm.
wanted to ensure that that student voice was coming through in everything that they did.
Mm.
Number four, as the school leader, I needed to be the instructional leader of the organization.
Mm.
Number five, I want to lead with a coaching mindset. And then number six was simply being the champion of the organization, which again comes back to something I said earlier, which is leading from the front, the middle, and the back. And by identifying my six things,
Mm.
then I had an opportunity to really be clear of
Mm.
who I am as a leader
Mm.
and what are those things that I'm going to lean into when it comes time for decision making, like you asked in the previous question.
Well said. And my last question for you, Darren, this is the age of startups. The whole world, young people, old people, everyone's doing a
Yeah.
startup. And while they've got great ideas, one of the things that I've often seen with startup leaders is that they struggle to create a culture within their organization, which is still very young. What advice would you give a startup entrepreneur or a startup leader trying to create a purpose-driven culture from scratch?
Yeah, I think that's such a great question. Not only, the experience in the school leadership, but then now also being an entrepreneur and having, done
Yeah.
my own startup. I think that's a great question. And I think what it really comes down to is getting clear. I know it sounds like I'm a bit of a broken record here, but if we don't get really clear about what we're
Hmm.
trying to do,
Yeah.
then it's really hard to build that culture. As I launched into my entrepreneurial space, there were a lot of different things that I thought, oh, well, hey, I can do this. I could support here. I could support here. I could support here. But over the last 3.5 years, I've really gotten that sharpened down to just one or two very crystal clear things of this is what I do. This is where my expertise really, really comes out.
Right.
And if we're not like really sharp on what we are focusing on doing, then we're just going to be all over the place.
Yeah.
And if you want to build a culture in your organization that's really focused on a purpose,
Yeah.
you just got to simply get really clear on what the purpose is
Correct.
and make sure you speak to it often so that everybody truly gets it, understands it, and takes ownership of it.
Amazing. And on that note, Darrin, I just want to say thank you so much for speaking to me about your own amazing journey from the world of education and academia to now being on your own and building and giving so much knowledge about leadership and culture. We had a very interesting conversation that covered effective leadership. We spoke about aligning values and leadership style. We spoke about the role of empathy. We spoke about storytelling, resilience. We also spoke about purpose driven culture and how storytelling plays a role in it. And you had some very great pointers, including the six that you told me about from your book, about how important it is for startup leaders to be able to build culture. Thank you again for speaking to me, and good luck to you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.